They found him in the ashes of a world already damned, a creature of impossible origin, born of infernal fire, yet unflinching beneath the Emperor's light. The Inquisition called him a weapon. The Ecclesiarchy called him a blasphemy. The Ordo Malleus simply called him necessary. He had no name at first, only the brand the priests burned into his flesh. Abominatus Sanctus. But among the ranks who fought beside him, he earned another, the Hellborn acolyte. His hands were carved from something not of this universe, his blood thick with the stink of warp fire, his soul, a battlefield between damnation and duty. When the Inquisition unleashed him upon the heretics of Hell's Reach, entire cults vanished overnight. When they chained him before a dying demon host, even the creature wept, for in that half-breed's eyes burned the same rage as the warp, yet it was leashed, bound, turned toward humanity's survival. And so the question remains, what happens when the Imperium's most forbidden weapon is a being who should never have existed at all? If this vision of forbidden faith and monstrous loyalty grips your imagination, stand vigil with us. Subscribe, share this chronicle, and bear witness to the story the Inquisition tried to erase from every archive. The tale of the demon who served the Emperor. The storm had raged for 7 days over the corpse of Vale Secundus. Lightning clawed across the heavens, revealing towers cracked open like skulls and manufactorum ruins bleeding smoke into the ash-choked air. Inquisitor Lyra Voss stood at the edge of what had once been a cathedral. Its spire collapsed into a pit of molten glass, and listened to the echo of a prayer swallowed by thunder. Her retinue fanned out behind her, servo skulls buzzing through the gloom, auspexes whispering static. Somewhere beneath their boots the heretic's vault waited, buried under centuries of rot and secrecy. The vox crackled. "Inquisitor, we've found it." The voice belonged to interrogator Saren Holt, his tone strained by the rebreather. An energy signature beneath the sanctum ruins, warp active. Lyra did not answer at once. She stared through the acid rain, her wide-brimmed hat dripping black water, and whispered a benediction under her breath. The air tasted of iron and ozone, and something else, something older that lingered like burnt incense on the tongue. She motioned her retinue forward. "Purge formation. No psychers. The storm's veil is thin enough already." They descended into the cathedral's wound, a spiral of fractured marble and twisted rebar. Candles guttered where the cult had burned their offerings. Bone dust mixed with rusted cogwork. Someone had tried to summon something here long ago and failed. Or perhaps they had succeeded too well. The further they went, the thicker the air became, pressing against their lungs like a living thing. At last they reached the vault doors, twin slabs of adamantine engraved with the sigil of the Ordo Malleus, long before the Inquisition had even claimed this sector. Lyra's gloved hand traced the old marks. Wards of sealing and banishment, faded but not broken. Holt stepped forward with a data slate. "Inquisitor, this seal predates the heresy. It shouldn't even exist here." "Nothing in the galaxy should," she replied softly. "And yet here we stand. They burned the seals." The doors shuddered open on pistons that screamed like dying men, exhaling a gust of air that reeked of ash and sanctified oil. The light of their lumen globes pierced the dark, and found a figure kneeling amid a circle of scorched runes. Shackles of black iron coiled around its wrists and neck, bound into the floor like anchors. Its skin was crimson, scarred with old brands. Horns curved from its skull like the broken wings of a statue. Chains wrapped its chest in layered script etched with prayers of containment. It breathed, slowly, deeply. Holt raised his weapon. "Emperor, preserve us!" The Inquisitor lifted a hand. "Hold fire." Her voice was calm, but it carried command enough to halt every man in the chamber. She stepped closer, boots ringing on the black stone. The creature's eyes opened, not red, not gold, but something between them, burning faintly in the shadows. It looked at her as if seeing through her soul. "You are not one of them," it said, voice low, like fire caught in a bellows. Lyra's jaw tightened. "Speak again and I will silence you. You can try." Bolters clicked in unison. The creature smiled. It was a tired smile, old and bitter, as though it had been waiting 1,000 years for someone to point a weapon at its head. Then it said something no demon should ever say. "Ave Imperator." The words rippled through the air like a heresy. Even the auspexes flickered and died. Holt swore under his breath. "It speaks the Emperor's name." Lyra's gaze didn't waver. I heard. The creature tilted its head, chains clinking. You came to kill me. I will not stop you. But if you do, the wards fall. The thing I keep bound below will wake. You do not want that, Inquisitor. It knew her title. It shouldn't have. Lyra's finger hovered near her bolt pistol, but something beneath logic stayed her hand. She studied its face. There was no mocking arrogance there, no chaotic malice. Only weariness. Only truth. What are you? She asked. The creature looked up toward the ceiling, toward the storm beyond. A mistake the warp forgot to hate. The vault trembled then, distant, guttural, as if the planet itself exhaled through the wound in its crust. Vox channels erupted in static. A red rune blinked to life on Holt's slate. Warp breach detected. Seal this chamber, Holt shouted. We've got a surge. But the creature only closed its eyes and began to chant, low, resonant in a tongue older than High Gothic. The air thickened with light. Sigils along the floor ignited, and a spectral barrier flared into existence, holding back a rift clawing open beneath the vault. Through it, Lyra saw shapes, teeth, tendrils, the echo of 1,000 screaming faces. She understood then. Whatever this being was, it wasn't the breach. It was the seal. Containment protocols, she barked. But her acolytes were already struggling to stand against the pressure wave. One by one, the Vox links fried. Holt fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Only Lyra stood firm, cloak whipping in the storm of psychic heat. She reached out toward the circle, the glow searing her glove away. What's your name? The creature's eyes snapped open again. Names burn, it said. But once they called me Anung. The floor split. The barrier screamed. Warp light spilled upward like liquid gold and shadow combined. And in that moment, Lyra made the decision that would damn her forever. She drew her rosarius from her neck, pressed its holy light to the runes, and shattered the seal. The explosion that followed lit the ruins for miles. When the smoke cleared, only 2 figures remained standing, the Inquisitor coughing through blood and ash, and the red-skinned thing unchained, breathing free air for the first time in millennia. He knelt before her. Command me, Inquisitor, he said, his voice hoarse. Before the others wake. The world outside howled. The vault above began to collapse. Lyra met his gaze and against every tenet she had ever sworn nodded once. Then rise, Hellbourne. By my word, serve. The storm swallowed them both. The rain had not ceased when they emerged from the ruins. It came down in sheets of ash and acid, hissing on armor and flesh alike. The sky above Vale Secundus pulsed with warp light, clouds twisting in obscene geometries before snapping back into the semblance of a storm. The planet groaned as though waking from a nightmare. Lyra Voss and the creature, the Hellbourne, trudged through the mire, their silhouettes backlit by the burning remains of the cathedral. Behind them, the vault sealed itself in a collapse of molten debris, burying whatever ancient horror had stirred beneath. The Inquisitor's rebreather hissed with every breath, the lenses of her mask reflecting faint traces of amber lightning. Her mind burned with questions, all of them treacherous. She was a daughter of the Ordo Hereticus, trained from youth to see corruption in every whisper, every shadow, every miracle. And yet, the thing that walked beside her had held the warp at bay. She had seen it, felt it, tasted it in the air. The impossible inversion of damnation turned to protection. The creature kept its head bowed as they walked. The chains that had once bound him hung broken around his wrists, dragging furrows in the mud. His skin still glowed faintly where the runes had branded it, a map of suffering and faith interwoven. When the thunder rolled, it sounded as if the world itself mocked him. You should have killed me, he said. I still might. Lyra's voice was sharp, but her hand did not reach for her weapon. Explain yourself before I decide. He glanced at her, rain streaming down his heavy brow ridges. There was a breach sealed beneath that vault. I was placed there to contain it. Those who bound me are long dead, Wyan, but the seal demanded blood, living blood. So I stayed awake, praying to a god I was never meant to know. Praying? She repeated, half in disbelief. The creature's smile was faint, almost human. In the dark, everything prays. Her Vox unit crackled. A distant voice, Holt, barely coherent through static. Inquisitor. Storms dispersing. Emperor's light, what did you do down there? Secured a relic, she replied. Rendezvous at the extraction point now, she cut the link. Her eyes returned to the creature. If you truly serve the Emperor, You'll submit to examination aboard my ship. No resistance. No lies. I have no lies left. Good, because the Ordo Malleus will decide whether you are to serve or be erased. At that, the creature bowed his head as if accepting judgment from the stars themselves. The mud swallowed his reflection as they walked on toward the landing site, where the Sanctus Veritas waited like a black blade against the storm. The gunship's interior was a cold furnace of steel and silence. Holt sat opposite the creature, weapon locked and trembling in his grasp. "Inquisitor," he muttered through his respirator. "This is madness. The Ordo will burn us all for this." "They might," Lyra said evenly, "but until they do, he answers to me." The creature sat still, massive even in the reinforced restraints that hissed with electrostatic charge. His eyes roamed the interior of the craft, studying every sigil and aquila carved into its plating. "You bind your faith in metal," he said softly. "But faith is not steel. It breaks differently." Lyra turned away from him. "Silence," the Vox hissed with turbulence. Outside, lightning cut the clouds as the gunship rose above the ruins, its engines roaring over the sound of distant chanting, the last echoes of cultists caught in their death throes below. Veil Secundus burned behind them, the flames of heresy purged by storm and orbital lance. Yet in the hold of the gunship something colder burned still, the knowledge that she had just unchained something older than sin. When the Sanctus Veritas reached orbit, the void swallowed all sound. The ship's corridors stretched long and dim, lit only by the pale glow of sanctified lumen strips. Tech priests clanked through the decks reciting Binharic prayers, oblivious to what their mistress had brought aboard. The creature was confined in a hexagonal containment cell, layered with adamantine latticework and psychic dampeners. The air smelled of ozone and incense. Servo skulls hovered like pale carrion, recording everything. Lyra stood beyond the barrier, hands clasped behind her back, the rosarius at her throat flickering from residual heat damage. Holt lingered nearby, face pale beneath his scarred mask. "Identify your species," she began. The creature looked up, unblinking. "I was made. Not born. By whom? By a man who thought he could make a weapon out of a prophecy. He was wrong. Name him." "I can't. His name burned away when he gave it to me." Her gaze hardened. "You speak riddles. That will end." "I speak as I remember," the Hellbourne said, voice low, "and memory is not mercy." He turned his head slightly as though listening to something she couldn't hear. "There are whispers aboard your vessel, Inquisitor. Something follows you." "Not me." Lyra's pulse quickened. "Explain." "The thing from the vault," he said. "It marked you when you shattered the seal. You carry its echo now." Her hand went instinctively to her chest. For a moment she felt nothing, but deep beneath the rhythm of her heartbeat there was another pulse, a faint vibration, almost mechanical, almost alive. She stepped closer to the barrier. "If this is true, you'll remove it." His eyes burned brighter. "I can try, but you won't like what I find." The cell lights dimmed as the ship entered shadow. Lyra hesitated, a single second that felt like eternity, then keyed open the secondary field. The energy shimmered. The Hellbourne rose, chains rattling, and extended a clawed hand. "Do not resist," he said. "Faith alone may not be enough." The deck trembled. Holt shouted, "Inquisitor, this is insane!" Light erupted between them, not warp fire, but something stranger. A mixture of gold and scarlet like sanctified blood turned to flame. The creature's palm pressed against her armor, and for an instant, she felt the void itself look back at her. When the light faded, she staggered. Smoke curled from the seams of her carapace. The Hellbourne's hand bled, black ichor steaming as it dripped onto the floor. "It's gone," he said. "For now." Lyra straightened, breath ragged. "You risked your life. I have nothing else to risk." The silence between them stretched like a blade. Then softly she said, "You may yet find purpose." He tilted his head. "And if I do? Then perhaps even the Emperor can forgive creation's mistakes." Outside, the ship broke through the last clouds of Veil Secundus. Below, the storm finally died. But in the void above, a new one was already forming. The Hellbourne lowered his gaze and whispered, "Not to her, not to anyone. Just to the silence, then let his will be done." The lights flickered once, like the ship itself shivered at his words, and far below, in the ruins of the vault, something unseen stirred. something that did not forget the one who had escaped. The Sanctus Veritas drifted through the void like a cathedral of judgment. Its hull bore the scars of old crusades, its vox masts whispering scripture into the dark between stars. Deep within its sanctum decks, beyond the shrines and data vaults, a single containment wing pulsed with activity. The Ordo Malleus had sent their delegation, a procession of psychers, priests, and magos biologists, to study the creature now designated Subject Unknown 9. To them, he was not man, not demon, not Xenos. He was a question wrapped in sin. Inquisitor Lyra Voss watched from the observation dais as the experiment began. The Hellbourne stood unflinching in a ring of null light, chains running from ceiling to floor, his body marked by sigils of restraint that shimmered with counterwarp energy. The chamber hummed with the low drone of psychic generators, their rhythm matching the heartbeat of the ship. "Commence Phase 1, said the lead Magos, his voice a rasp of vox distortion. Servo arms extended, drawing samples from the creature's skin, each drop of blood hissing as it met the air, burning with faint warp glow before crystallizing into black dust. The Magos murmured in Binharic awe. Fascinating. Each cell displays dual-phase resonance, both matter and immaterium. Lyra folded her arms. Meaning? Meaning? The Magos said. That he is alive in two realities at once. She glanced down at the creature whose expression remained still, unreadable. He met her eyes through the glass and spoke, his voice carrying through the vox relay. You let them cut, but not to heal. You will endure, Lyra said. As you have before, he smiled faintly. Endurance is all I have ever been. The psychers began the next phase. 6 of them formed a circle around the containment cell, their hands raised, chanting the canticle of revelation. The air shivered as unseen currents passed through it. One by one, their eyes rolled back as they reached into the warp, searching the creature's essence. For a heartbeat, all seemed calm. Then the first of them screamed. It was a sound not of pain, but rejection. The psychic feedback threw him backward, skull striking the wall with a wet crack. The others faltered as a shockwave rippled outward, a tide of golden fire laced with something darker. Symbols flared across the chamber walls. Incense burners shattered. A servitor convulsed and fell silent. The Mago shouted for containment fields. Lyra drew her bolt pistol. But before she could issue the purge order, the creature raised his shackled hands. Stop, he said. You're calling them. Calling who? She demanded. The things that made me. Then the lights went out. For a moment there was nothing but the hum of the generators and the staccato pulse of emergency beacons. Shapes moved in the darkness, shadows bending in ways they should not. Holt's voice came through the comms, broken by static. Inquisitor. Multiple warp intrusions on Deck 7. Repeat, multiple intrusions. Lyra's instincts took over. Seal bulkheads. Sanctify the airlocks. The chamber doors slammed shut, sealing them in. The psychers were on their knees, weeping blood. In the center of the chaos, the Hellbourne stood radiant in the darkness, his skin flickering with inner flame. The runes on his chains burned away one by one, releasing coils of smoke that smelled like sanctified oil. Do you want me to stop this? He asked. Lyra's voice trembled despite herself. If you can, then give the word. She hesitated. The Emperor's words echoed in her training. Never trust the weapon that thinks it can choose its target. But around her, reality itself began to unravel. Voices whispered from the bulkheads. Faces formed in the light. One of the priests clawed at his eyes, crying, The warp is awake! She gave the word. The Hellbourne exhaled, and the fire came. It was not chaos fire, not the shrieking blaze of demons, but a light so pure it seared shadow into nothing. His chains split apart, metal melting into liquid silver that dripped onto the floor and burned holes through the plating. He moved like judgment incarnate, striking at the unseen, tearing through the veil with every motion. To Lyra's eyes, he seemed to burn from within, as though his soul was a battlefield between two suns. The psychic storm broke in minutes that felt like eternity. When silence returned, the floor was littered with the husks of servitors and the air smelled of ash and iron. The only living figures were Lyra, Holt, the Magos, and him. He knelt amid the ruin, smoke rising from his shoulders, the last embers dying around him. They will not stop, he said softly. They smell me in the dark. Lyra approached him, lowering her weapon. Then they will come for you? They already have. She looked toward the observation window, cracked but intact. Through it, the stars bled red. Warp anomalies pulsed around the Sanctus Veritas like bruises forming in the void. "We'll make for Titan," she ordered. "The Ordo Malleus will contain this." The creature raised his head. "Titan cannot contain what I carry. And what is that?" He stared at her for a long moment before answering. The Emperor's echo. The words hung in the air, impossible and holy all at once. Holt whispered, "Blasphemy." But Lyra could not move. Something deep within her, the same part that had hesitated to kill him, felt those words like a pulse of truth. The chamber's lumen flickered back to life, painting the scene in stark monochrome. A woman of unshakable faith, and the creature who had just saved her from the warp itself. Lyra holstered her weapon. "We'll see what Titan decides. Until then, you're under my authority. An Emperor help you if you betray it." The Hellbourne gave no reply. He simply bowed his head. For a brief moment in the silence that followed, Lyra thought she heard something, faint, distant, impossible, and like the whisper of a choir from a world far away. And in that whisper, she thought she heard laughter. The Sanctus Veritas groaned as it entered the shadow between real space and the warp. The ship's Geller field shimmered like a veil of trembling light, struggling to hold back the things pressing against it. In the command sanctum, incense burners swung on brass chains, spilling curls of smoke across the command dais. Lyra Voss stood over the hollow projection of the ship's trajectory, Titan, seat of the Grey Knights, 2 weeks distant if the warp currents held. But already the readings quivered with distortion. Every day since the breach, the Hellbourne had been silent. Confined in his sanctified chamber, he neither slept nor spoke. Even under the gaze of the ship's astropaths, his psychic signature remained a paradox. At once blinding and invisible, Lyra found herself drawn to his presence against all reason. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. The ship's crew whispered that the Geller field was failing, that something inside, not outside, was gnawing at its edges. When she entered his cell again, the light flickered as if recognizing her. He was sitting cross-legged on the cold metal floor, chains coiled beside him like the remnants of an old sin. His eyes opened as she approached. "You've come sooner than I expected." "I didn't have time to wait," she replied. "The ship's wards are weakening." His gaze softened, almost pitying. "They would. The warp does not forget what it has lost. You speak as if you were one of its saints. Saints are only devils who were forgiven too late." Lyra's hand hovered over her bolt pistol, not from threat but to remind herself of who she was. "You said the warp would come for you. I need to know why." He tilted his head, horns catching the dim light like black glass. "Because they made me to bridge the distance between what is damned and what is divine. I was a weapon meant to speak the Emperor's name in the language of demons." She stared at him. "You're saying you were created by man, by a man who believed he could turn hell itself into a sermon." His eyes drifted to the floor. "He called it the Crucible Project. He thought if he could craft a being half of the warp and half of man, it could stand in both worlds and burn neither." Lyra felt a chill despite the heat in the air. "Impossible, yes," he said. "And that is why they killed him." She paced the perimeter of the cell, trying to steady the swirl of thought. "So you claim to have been born of human design, sanctified by heresy, and bound for eternity as a weapon of faith. If that were true, every record of you would have been erased." "Perhaps they were," he murmured. "But records die easier than what they try to forget." A silence stretched between them. The hum of the field generators deepened into a low, trembling throb. Then came the distant sound, like metal screaming against metal. Holt's voice burst through Lyra's vox bead. "Inquisitor. Geller field spike, Section 8 collapsing." "Seal the section," she ordered, turning for the door. But the Hellbourne rose to his feet. "You won't stop it from the bridge." Lyra turned back. "You think I should trust you again?" "No, but you should trust what the warp fears." Another impact rattled the floor. The lights turned crimson. Sirens wailed as the hull shuddered beneath invisible claws. Lyra cursed under her breath. "Fine, you move under my command." "One betrayal and I'll burn what's left of your soul." He nodded once. "Then lead the way, Inquisitor." They emerged into a corridor bathed in strobing red light. Crewmen ran past with rosaries and las carbines, reciting prayers between breaths. The air tasted metallic, sharp with ozone and blood. From the lower decks came the unmistakable chorus, the distorted moans of the warp pressing through the walls. They reached the Geller control sanctum, where a ring of servitors hung suspended in a cage of gold wire, their skulls connected by streams of crackling energy. Holt was there, his face pale under the glow of warning runes. Inquisitor, the field's fracturing. We've got breaches on both aft conduits. Can you stabilize it? She demanded. He shook his head. The psionic core's feedbacking. It's like something's feeding on the field itself. All eyes turned to the Hellbourne. He stepped toward the trembling light of the generator, the glow reflecting in his crimson skin. They've found me, he said simply. What are they? Holt asked. My brothers. The air cracked open. A fissure split the sanctum wall, spilling blinding warp light. From it emerged shapes of molten shadow, creatures that wore echoes of his form, horned and blazing with hatred. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, their voices a chorus of accusation. You betrayed us, Anung. You bent the knee to false light. The Hellbourne stepped forward, unarmed, eyes steady. I chose duty. You chose hunger. Duty is just faith without truth, the demons hissed, advancing. Lyra drew her bolt pistol, her voice steady despite the madness. Then truth dies here. The first demon lunged, and the chamber erupted into war. Bolter rounds tore through flesh that was more idea than matter, bursting into streams of black fire. The Hellbourne moved beside her like a creature sculpted for violence, his right arm igniting in runes that burned through the warped skin. Every strike from his fist sent a shockwave through the chamber, but for each creature slain, another crawled through. Holt fell to his knees, shielding his eyes from the psychic glare. We can't hold this. The Hellbourne turned toward the generator, blood and light dripping from his claws. I can hold them, but only if you lower the field. Lyra froze. You'd unleash the warp into the ship. I'll take it with me. His tone was calm, almost gentle. That's why I was made. For the briefest instant, Lyra saw it, not the monster, but the martyr. The weapon that had never asked to be born. She holstered her weapon. Do it. The Geller field collapsed with a scream. A hurricane of psychic force tore through the sanctum, turning air into liquid flame. The demons howled as the Hellbourne roared, his body splitting into a silhouette of pure light and shadow entwined. He drew them in, their screams devoured by the fire that consumed him. When the light finally faded, the field flickered back to life. The fissure was gone. So were the demons, and the Hellbourne knelt in the ashes, smoke curling from his flesh. It's done, he whispered. Lyra approached, voice raw. You should be dead. He looked up, eyes now dull and human for the first time. Perhaps I am. He collapsed, and as the Sanctus Veritas limped toward Titan, the Inquisitor watched over the fallen creature in the Medikey Bay, wondering not whether he could be saved, but whether the Imperium itself could bear what he represented. Outside the viewport, the warp calmed, but only for now. The wind screamed across the shattered walls of Hell's Reach like the voice of a dying god. Smoke and dust blanketed the city, its streets drowned in the carcasses of tanks and the stench of promethium. From the upper battlements, Inquisitor Lyra Voss watched the horizon bleed green, the telltale color of orc war engines crawling across the plains. The Wah had come in numbers beyond counting, a tide of metal and muscle pounding toward the city's heart. The Astra Militarum's banners, once proud above the spire bastions, now hung in tatters over the ruins. The Sanctus Veritas orbited high above, too damaged for further descent, leaving the Inquisitor and what remained of the 17th Veil Shock Regiment to defend the Imperium's last foothold on the planet. Beside her, shrouded in a tattered cloak of sackcloth and iron chains, stood the creature she had unbound, the Hellbourne. His flesh still bore the scars of his sacrifice aboard the Sanctus Veritas, runes scorched into his shoulders and chest. He carried no banner, no aquila, only the memory of flame and the weight of silence. The walls won't hold another day, Holt said, his voice frayed. His armor was cracked, his respirator broken, one eye hidden beneath a makeshift bandage. Artillery's out. Fox contact with orbits gone. If the orcs breach the Manufacturum district, they will, Lyra interrupted. But not before we answer. Her gaze shifted to the Hellbourne. You were forged to face the warp. Let's see if that fire can burn green flesh too. The creature looked toward the rising storm of engines and banners. The sky above Hell's Reach pulsed with explosions, the clouds lit by the constant thunder of macro shells. You don't need me to fight orcs, he said quietly. You need me to make them remember what they fear. Lyra studied him through the haze. And what do they fear? The same thing you do, he murmured. What happens when faith becomes fire? She said nothing. Instead, she turned to Holt. Prepare the forward line. If we're to die here, we'll make it cost them their gods. The orcs struck before dawn. Their first assault came like a living avalanche. Warbikes roaring, sluggers howling, deaf dreads lumbering through the smoke. The sky split as rocks crashed into the outlying hab blocks, showering the trenches with burning debris. Guardsmen braced their laser guns along the walls, firing into the green tide until the barrels glowed red. Over the Vox, liturgies of hate echoed. For the Emperor, for Hell's Reach, for humanity unbroken. The Hellborn stood unmoving as the first wave hit. Bullets struck his skin and hissed away as sparks. When the orcs came close enough to smell, he moved. He waded into their ranks like a storm-given flesh, fists shattering armor, bones breaking beneath blows that cracked the sound barrier. His right hand burned brighter than the sun, each strike leaving trails of molten light through the air. To the guardsmen who saw him, he was no longer merely a creature. He was a vision of divine wrath, the Emperor's vengeance made manifest in horn and flame. A commissar near the gate dropped to his knees, tears cutting lines through soot on his cheeks. The Emperor sends his angel, he cried, and the cry spread. Men rose from cover. The firing lines surged. They fought like believers again. Through the smoke, Lyra moved among them, her voice a calm counterpoint to the carnage. Hold the line. Faith is your armor. Fire is your prayer. The battle raged for hours. The manufacturing quarter turned into a cathedral of fire and ruin. The Hellborn tore through Estampa's knee joint with his bare hands, ripping out its engine core and casting it into a mob of charging orcs. Promethium tanks exploded in chains of light that turned night to day. The green tide faltered. For the first time, the orcs hesitated, not because they feared death, but because something in the creature's presence felt wrong, unnatural even to their brutal instincts. From the ridge beyond the city, the war boss watched through lenses carved from skulls. Dat one, he growled. Red one. Big horns. We crump him first. The second wave came heavier, with knobs and mechs at the vanguard. Lyra saw the wag! Banners crest the horizon, their glyphs blazing in green fire. She turned to Holt. Evacuate the Meta-K levels. Get every wounded guardsman you can to the tunnels. What about you? She chambered a bolt round. I'm not done here. The Hellborn strode past her, smoke trailing from his skin. Nor am I. The orcs hit like a tidal wave. Lyra's squad was swallowed in seconds. Holt's last Vox burst ended in static. The sky burned with tracer fire. The Hellborn's revolver roared, a relic forged from demon bone firing shells engraved with the names of saints. Each shot ripped through orcs in bursts of incandescent light. He fought until the ammunition ran dry, then cast the weapon aside and turned to the oldest language of war, his fists. Amid the carnage, an orc knob twice his height swung a chain axe down upon him. The Hellborn caught the weapon mid-swing, muscles cracking, and drove his other hand through the brute's chest. The orc fell with a wet scream, black ichor spilling across the mud. The Hellborn rose, drenched in gore, his horns glowing from heat. Then he heard it, a voice beneath the thunder, deep and mocking. You can't hide from what you are, son of the pit. He froze. The battlefield blurred. The flames bent inward, drawing into a single point before him, and from it stepped a shadow wearing his own face. The creature's double grinned, teeth like obsidian daggers. Did you think you could crawl out of hell and pray your way into heaven? You are what we made you. The real Hellborn's breath came slow, heavy. You are nothing but the echo of a lie. Then why do you still burn? Lyra saw him falter. The orc swarmed again, sensing weakness. She raised her pistol and screamed through the Vox. Focus, this is not your war alone. The echo vanished with the next explosion, smoke scattering like a ghost. The Hellborn turned, eyes aflame once more, and unleashed a roar that split the din of battle. He tore through the enemy ranks anew, driven by rage not of hatred but of defiance. By nightfall, the walls still stood. Barely. Lyra found him at dawn, kneeling amid the ruins of the courtyard, surrounded by the dead. Steam rose from his skin where the rain struck it. His horns were blackened, his hands raw and bleeding. Report, she said. He looked up at her. The enemy sleeps. For now, she nodded. And you? He stared at the rising sun. The same. For the first time, she almost believed him, but far beyond the smoke, in the endless dunes beyond Hell's Reach, a new sound began to rise. Not the crude laughter of orcs, but the solemn chant of something else, something holy. The sun never rose cleanly over Hell's Reach again. It crawled through the smoke like a dying ember, casting blood-colored light over the ruins. The battle had ended only hours before, yet the city felt older, as though time itself had withered under the weight of what it had witnessed. The surviving guardsmen moved like ghosts among the wreckage, stacking corpses and whispering half-remembered prayers. The air reeked of promethium, iron, and something else, something faintly divine, as if the Emperor himself had walked the killing fields. Inquisitor Lyra Voss stood upon the shattered ramparts, a vox in one hand, her other pressed against the wound beneath her armor. She had not slept. She could not. Her voice rasped as she whispered into the receiver. "This is Inquisitor Voss Ordo Hereticus, designation Theta Vermilion. Hell's Reach holds, but only barely. We request immediate reinforcement from orbit. Repeat, planetary contact imminent. Warp interference remains high. Static devoured the rest." No answer. She lowered the vox and exhaled. The air cut her throat like glass. Around her, the banners of the Astra Militarum fluttered in the hot wind, symbols of endurance now soaked in ash and blood. Holt approached from the stairwell below, his armor stripped to its core plates, his skin lined with fresh scars. "No response?" "None," Lyra said. "Even the astropaths are blind. The warp storms haven't cleared." Holt looked out across the battlefield. "If the orcs return, we can't hold this place again." Lyra didn't reply. She was staring at the figure kneeling amid the ruins of the Manufactorum, the Hellboy. He had not moved since the fighting ended. Around him lay hundreds of orc corpses, blackened and burned into ash. The air above him shimmered faintly as if refusing to touch him. "He hasn't spoken?" Holt asked. "Not since dawn." Holt swallowed. "He fought like a god." Lyra's gaze was unreadable. "Gods die. We can't afford one of those." She made her way down through the wreckage, the metal groaning beneath her boots. The closer she came, the heavier the air grew. It wasn't heat, it was presence. The kind of oppressive stillness that made mortals kneel without knowing why. The Hellboy sat motionless, his massive frame hunched forward, his horns shadowed by the rising sun. "You've been silent a long time," she said quietly. He didn't answer. His hands were clasped together, black with soot, still trembling slightly. It took her a moment to realize what he was doing. Praying. His lips moved soundless, words lost to the wind. "Prayer doesn't suit monsters," she said. He looked up at her, eyes burning softly, not with rage but sorrow. "And yet monsters are all you have left." Lyra crouched before him, meeting his gaze. "What did you see last night?" "I saw myself," he replied. "And I saw what waits when I stop pretending I'm not one of them. The shadow on the battlefield." He nodded slowly. He wasn't just a vision. He was the first. The prototype before me. They made others. But I was the only one that lived. Lyra frowned. "Others?" "Yes, they were meant to be weapons against demons. But the warp doesn't obey creators. It obeys only hunger. They became what they fought. Twisted reflections. He calls himself Anung Prime. He leads what's left of them. And he found you here. He always finds me." Before Lyra could answer, the vox on her belt flared with static, then a panicked voice. "Inquisitor! Contact unknown craft-breaching atmosphere. No identification. No Imperial codes." Lyra rose instantly. "Location? North Quadrant. The skies, Emperor preserve us." The transmission cut into a scream, then silence. She turned toward the horizon. Above the burned skyline, the clouds twisted again, not with the chaotic green of orc engines, but with crimson light. Ships, black and angular, cut through the smog. Symbols glimmered faintly upon their hulls. 8-pointed stars, inverted Aquilas. "Chaos," she whispered. The Hellborn's eyes flared. "No, not chaos. Them." A moment later, the bombardment began. Fire rained upon Hell's Reach, turning rubble to glass and flesh to vapor. The shock waves leveled what little remained of the walls. Guardsmen screamed prayers as orbital shells hammered the Manufactorum. The Hellboy rose to his full height, his cloak catching the wind like torn wings. "Move," Lyra shouted. "All units fall back to the inner sanctum now." The sky opened in flame. Through the inferno descended figures clad in crimson armor engraved with black runes. Warriors too disciplined for mere heretics, too coordinated for orcs. Their bolters spat crimson tracers, their movements cold and mechanical. But their faces, if they still had any, were hidden behind masks that resembled his own. Anung Prime had arrived. The Hellbourne stepped forward as the invaders marched through fire. The leader of the Crimson Host stood twice as tall as a man, his armor fused with living flesh, horns crowned with molten metal. His voice when it came was both beautiful and terrible. "You took his name in your mouth," Anung Prime said. "You bowed to the corpse on the throne. You betrayed your makers." The Hellbourne's voice was low but steady. "They made me to protect humanity." "You made yourself to destroy it." Anung Prime smiled. "Then we are both true to our nature." The two collided in a burst of light and thunder. The shockwave flattened the battlefield, ripping through the Manufactorum ruins. The duel that followed was not of flesh but of faith. Two beings carved from the same forbidden idea, their blows echoing across the burning city like judgment. Lyra could do nothing but watch as gods of man's making tore reality apart. The Hellbourne's fist struck first, driving Anung Prime through a collapsed tank. The creature rose unharmed, countering with a sweep that split the ground. Their roars merged into a single sound, the sound of creation rebelling against its own existence. For a moment it seemed the Hellbourne would fall. His strength waned, his wounds smoking with warp fire. Then, through the chaos, Lyra's voice cut across the vox, sharp and unwavering. "By the throne's light, remember who you are." Something within him snapped. The fire returned, not the crimson blaze of the warp, but the golden flame of will. He drove his hand through Anung Prime's chest, ripping free a core of black light that screamed as it died. The Crimson Army faltered, their master undone. The Hellbourne staggered, collapsing to his knees as the city fell silent. The last echoes of the enemy vanished into smoke. Lyra approached through the ash, her armor scorched, her voice soft. "It's over," he shook his head. "Nothing ends that begins with sin." She looked down at him, at the creature who had bled more for the Imperium than most men would ever dream. And for the first time she felt something like fear, not of him, but of what he meant. Because somewhere within that red ruin of a man, she thought she saw something no Inquisitor dared admit existed. Hope. They left Hell's Reach in silence. No hymns, no triumphal litanies, no banners raised. Only the sound of wind blowing through the dead city as the dropships of the Sanctis Veritas descended like dark angels to gather the survivors. The planet was a graveyard, its manufactoria melted to slag, its trenches filled with glassed bones. The orcs were gone, the Crimson Host erased, but so too was faith, the kind that builds, not burns. Inquisitor Lyra Voss stood aboard the ship's ramp as it rose through the atmosphere, watching Hell's Reach shrink into a smear of rust beneath the clouds. Her armor was cracked, her voice gone raw, her will frayed to its edge. Around her, the wounded muttered the same prayer over and over, not out of hope, but habit. The Hellbourne sat apart from them, head bowed, the faint glow of his scars pulsing beneath torn flesh. His chains were gone. He wore no restraints now, not because he was free, but because no one aboard dared touch him again. Holt approached, his right arm bound in a sling. "He should be contained, Inquisitor. The men look at him and forget who they are." "They remember what they've lost," Lyra said. "Faith isn't meant to be a wound," Holt muttered. She turned to him, exhaustion sharpening into steel, and yet it's the only thing that bleeds and lives. When the Sanctus Veritas broke orbit, the warp storms parted like curtains of black glass. The Geller field hummed steady this time. Not trembling, not screaming. It was as though the warp itself held its breath, waiting. In the days that followed, the inquisitorial dispatches never came. No command from Titan, no summons from Terra. The ship drifted between systems like a coffin lost in the dark. And slowly, strange reports began to surface. Crewmen swore they saw golden light passing through the corridors at night. Vox channels filled with ghost hymns sung in tongues no one remembered. And in the chapel, where the Aquila hung in shattered gold, the votive candles burned in twin colors, white and red. Lyra investigated it herself. She walked the length of the sanctum, alone, her boots echoing across marble streaked with soot. The air smelled faintly of incense and something else. That same burnt amber scent that followed the Hellbourne wherever he went. He was already there, kneeling before the altar. His head was lowered, horns catching the glow of the candles. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "Neither should you." She stepped closer, her voice cold. "This is the Emperor's house. I know." His tone was almost reverent. "That's why I come here. It's quiet. Even he must be tired of screaming." She stared at him. "Blasphemy." He turned then slowly, eyes like dying suns. "If the Emperor is truly God, then he's the loneliest being in existence. Locked on a throne, devoured by his own creation. Is that holiness or punishment?" Her jaw clenched. "You know nothing of his will." "Perhaps not," he said. "But I know what faith costs. I have seen men burn for it, planets erased for it, children sacrificed in its name. Tell me, Inquisitor, how much blood before the Emperor is sated?" She drew her bolt pistol before she even realized it. The sound of its chamber loading echoed through the chapel like thunder. "Watch your tongue." He rose to his full height, towering over her, yet his voice softened. "And if I'm right?" For a moment they stood there, priest and demon, saint and heretic, both carved from the same impossible conviction. The candles flickered between them, their flames merging into a single trembling light. Then the ship shuddered. The lumen strips dimmed. The Vox relays screamed static. Holt's voice cut through the intercom. "Inquisitor! Contact from the warp! Something's pulling us off course by the throne. It's inside the Geller barrier." Lyra turned on her heel. "To the command deck." The Hellbourne followed without being asked. They arrived to chaos. Crewmen shouting prayers, sparks showering from overloaded consoles, the warp visible through the viewports, a shifting ocean of light and shadow. At its heart, a shape moved. Colossal. Radiant. Not the grotesque horror of a demon, but something divine and wrong, like an angel made from fire and machinery. Lyra felt her knees weaken. What is that?" The Hellbourne stared, unblinking. "That is what they tried to make me from." The entity's face was a mask of gold fractured by light. Its voice came not through the Vox, but through every mind aboard. "My son." The sound broke glass, cracked bone, filled lungs with fire. Crewmen collapsed, blood pouring from their ears. Lyra's heart stuttered under the weight of it. The Hellbourne stood firm. "I am not your son. You are what I could not be." The warp screamed as the ship's hull began to buckle. Lyra fell against the dais, fighting to breathe. "What is it?" She gasped. He answered without looking away. "A fragment. A shadow cast by the Emperor's light, or what's left of it." Her mind reeled. "You mean the Emperor?" "No," he said, voice breaking. "Not him. Just his echo lost in the warp since the heresy. The ghost of a god too bright to die." The entity reached toward the ship, its hand passing through the void as though space itself bowed. Reality flickered. Vox Spirit screamed. The Hellbourne braced himself, claws digging into the deck. "Go," he told her. "You can't stay here. What about you?" "I was made for this." The ship groaned as the warp's light consumed the viewports. Holt's voice shouted something over the intercom, lost beneath the roar of collapsing matter. Lyra reached for the Hellbourne, and for an instant, when her hand touched his, she felt it again. That impossible warmth, that divine cursed pulse. He looked at her, eyes calm. "If faith is a fire, then let it burn me first." Then he stepped forward into the storm. The entity's light met his own, and the universe went silent. For the crew of the Sanctus Veritas, time ceased to exist. Only the light remained, red and gold twined together like truth and sin. When sound returned, the ship drifted once more in real space, untouched. The stars burned cold around them, and the Hellbourne was gone. Only Lyra remained standing on the command dais, her hand blackened where she'd touched him, her heart echoing with words she could never speak. But deep within the ship, in the humming silence between decks, a faint heartbeat still pulsed, not mechanical, not human. Something between both. When the light died, the ship lay adrift between the stars, caught in a silence so profound that even the hum of the engines felt like blasphemy. The Sanctus Veritas floated through a sea of stillness, its crew too afraid to breathe. Warp scars ran like veins of gold along its hull, glowing faintly against the black. Within, the chapel bells rang of their own accord, though no hand touched them. Lyra Voss stood alone in the command sanctum. The lights were dim, her shadow long across the floor. She hadn't slept since the encounter. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the light again. The impossible convergence of something holy and unholy meeting in silence, then fading into nothing. The memory burned behind her eyelids like an afterimage of divinity. She turned her gaze to the viewport. Stars stared back, cold and indifferent. She pressed her bloodied glove against the glass and whispered, "If you can hear me, if you ever could, tell me what I've done." There was no answer, only the soft hum of the ship's life support, a heartbeat echoing faintly in the void. The door behind her hissed open. Holt entered quietly, his face drawn and pale. "Inquisitor, you should rest." "I will when I wake from this," she murmured. He hesitated. "We've completed the scans. You need to see this." He handed her a data slate. The readings flickered with unstable energy signatures, the kind only seen near relics of immense psychic weight. "This can't be correct," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's emanating from the lower decks," Holt said. "Same frequency as him." She looked up sharply. "That's impossible. He's gone." "Then explain the heartbeat we're detecting from inside the primary reactor core." Lyra froze. The words landed like stones in her chest. "Seal the lower decks," she said. "No one goes down there. Not even the Mechanicus." Holt hesitated. "If it's him, then it's already too late. But orders are one thing, faith another." By the time she reached the reactor chamber, she found half the tech priests already gathered in prayer, their voices droning in binary hymn. The air was heavy with sanctified smoke, the light dimmed by heat distortion. The central reactor pulsed like a heart, veins of golden fire winding through its adamantine shell. And within that light, she saw him. The Hellboy hung suspended in the core, body half dissolved, half reformed, as though the reactor itself had become his cocoon. Energy surged through him, his veins glowing with molten light. His face was still, almost peaceful. "Emperor's mercy," Holt whispered beside her. "He's alive." "No," Lyra said softly. "He's becoming." The magos overseeing the chamber turned, mechadendrites twitching in reverence. "Inquisitor, we cannot explain it." His presence stabilized the warp residue, purified the reactor. "The machine spirit sings hymns we did not teach it. It calls him conduit." Lyra's mind raced. "Shut it down." The magos blinked, lenses whirring. To interrupt now would kill him and possibly the ship. Then divert the power. Contain it before the floor trembled. A wave of light burst outward, flooding the chamber. For a heartbeat, every voice in the Mechanicus choir went silent. Then a sound rolled through the ship, a whisper that was not human. "The fire remembers the hand that lit it." The Hellborn's eyes snapped open. They were no longer red. Not gold, but both. Twin irises burning with a radiance that seared the air. His voice filled the chamber, not loud but absolute. "Why did you bring me back?" Lyra took a step forward. "We didn't." He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. "The light called." I answered. "Whose light?" she demanded. He smiled, weary, almost human. "Does it matter? Once I thought I was a weapon of man, then a curse of the warp. But perhaps I'm neither. Then what are you?" His gaze met hers. "A prayer that learned to walk." The words chilled her more than any demon's threat could. Holt made the sign of the Aquila, trembling. "Inquisitor, he's channeling the ship's reactor. How is that possible?" "He's not channeling it," Lyra said slowly. "He's replacing it." The reactor's pulse matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Each surge of energy radiated warmth, not heat, and the once chaotic warp signatures smoothed into harmonic patterns. Across the ship, systems came alive, operating at perfect efficiency. The crew began to whisper of miracles, of lights that never dimmed, wounds that closed on their own, and nightmares that no longer came. Faith returned to the Sanctus Veritas like a contagion. But not faith in the Emperor, faith in him. And Lyra knew what that meant. That night, she stood in the observation chapel once more, gazing into the dark. She recorded a message into her rosarius, her voice low, the words for Terra's archives, or perhaps for no one at all. "This is Inquisitor Lyra Voss, Ordo Hereticus. I have witnessed what should not exist. A creature once made in mockery of man now burns with the Emperor's light, or something like it. He heals, not destroys. He speaks peace to those who have never known it. If faith can be reborn through such a vessel, what does that say about ours? About him? If this reaches the conclave, know that I am not certain I still serve by your measure, but I serve nonetheless. She paused, her reflection flickering in the cracked glass of the viewport. And if he is listening, I hope he forgives me for doubting whether he can. Behind her, she heard the soft steps. She didn't turn. You shouldn't be awake. The Hellbourne stood in the doorway, his presence like the edge of a storm. I don't sleep anymore. I dream while standing. She smiled faintly without mirth. And what do you dream of? He looked out at the stars beside her. A world where fire burns without killing. But I don't think that world exists. Maybe it doesn't, she said. Maybe that's why we fight. He regarded her for a long moment. If the Emperor were here, do you think he'd see me as a tool? Or as a mirror? I don't know, she admitted. But I think you'd remind him of what he lost. The silence between them was vast and fragile. Then, softly the Hellbourne said, If I fall again, promise me you'll remember that I tried. I will, she said. The ship drifted on through the void. Two souls standing side by side, the believer and the blasphemy, united by a faith neither could fully claim. And somewhere in the warp beyond, unseen eyes turned toward them, watching, waiting. Because light once kindled never truly dies. It only changes what it burns. The ink bleeds when I write this. The parchment trembles as though even the ship itself resists what I'm about to confess. I am Lyra Voss, Ordo Hereticus, servant of the throne, voice of his judgment. And yet if these words are found, they will not be taken as confession, but heresy. For I have seen the Emperor's fire wear the face of a devil, and I cannot unsee it. It has been 109 days since the light returned to the Sanctus Veritas. The ship no longer needs its reactor. The Hellbourne is the reactor. His presence sustains us. Warp storms part when he wills it. Demons recoil before his shadow. The crew no longer fear the Imperium. They kneel to him, whispering prayers not of the Emperor, but of the Red Saint. They claim he intercedes between light and darkness, that his blood burns away the sins of the Imperium itself. I have executed 7 officers for heresy this week alone. But their dying words were all the same. He protects us now. He does. That is what terrifies me. The Sanctus Veritas drifts on the edge of the segmentum solar, awaiting command from Terra. But no signal comes. The astropaths have gone blind. When they reach for the Astronomican, they find only static. And in that static, a voice. His voice calm, steady, impossible. Holt visits me less now. I see the guilt in his eyes when he looks upon the creature he once feared. Even the Magos have begun to record hymns in binary, replacing the Omnissiah's name with his. The Hellbourne doesn't ask for worship, but he no longer refuses it. Perhaps he believes it will anchor him. Or perhaps deep down he knows he's becoming something far worse. I tell myself I am writing this record for the Ordos. But the truth is simpler. I am writing this because I do not know whether I still serve the Emperor, or merely the memory of him. Yesterday, I entered the sanctum again. He was there, standing before the shattered Aquila, watching it like a man staring into his own grave. The light from his chest pulsed softly, golden with a heartbeat that was not entirely human. You've been avoiding me, he said without turning. I've been busy trying to keep this ship from becoming a pilgrimage. Too late, he said quietly. They've already started carving my name into the decks. I felt my throat tighten. And what will you do about it? Nothing, he turned then, eyes calm. A god that demands silence is just another tyrant. Don't call yourself that, I don't. He stepped closer. They do. I wanted to strike him then, not from hatred but fear. Because in his presence, every certainty I had ever built began to crumble. His words weren't those of a monster. They were those of a man who had looked upon divinity and found it hollow. You could end this, I told him. A word from you and they'd return to the creed. He smiled sadly. Would they? Or would they only wait for the next miracle to kneel before? He looked out the viewport, where the warp shimmered in quiet awe. No longer a sea of madness, but a calm expanse of light. They need hope, Lyra. If the Emperor's fire won't answer them, they'll take mine. You're playing with damnation. I've lived there, he said. It's not so different from faith. We stood in silence. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's heartbeat. His heartbeat. Finally, I said, I'm taking us to Terra. The conclave will decide what you are. His expression changed, and for the first time in many days I saw something like fear in him. "If you bring me to Terra, they'll burn me." "Perhaps." He took a step closer, his voice breaking through the calm. "And if they burn me, the light dies with me. You've seen what happens when I fall silent. The warp stirs again. The storms rise. You'll doom thousands." "Better that," I said, "than the Imperium worship another false god." He studied me for a long time, the kind of look that peels the soul open. "And if the false god saves them and the true one stays silent, which is the greater heresy?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. He turned away then, his voice low. "You've already made your choice. I'll be waiting when you make the second." That was 3 days ago. Since then, I've ordered the Sanctus Veritas to prepare for warp translation toward Sol. The crew obey, but their eyes are wrong and too calm, too trusting. Holt has disappeared. The Magos has sealed himself in the reactor bay, claiming, "The machine spirit speaks in new tongues." And last night, I woke to find the walls of my quarters covered in fresh script, not painted, burned in. The Red Saint saves, no brush, no pigment, just fire. This morning, the Hellboy came to me in silence. He didn't speak. He simply handed me a rosarius, my own, long broken, now whole again. The light within it pulsed to his rhythm. "I don't want your miracles," I told him. He looked at me as if pitying a child who refuses to eat. "Then pray I stop making them." He left. And now as I sit in my quarters writing this confession, the Vox crackles with untraceable voices whispering his name. The lights flicker in tandem with his heartbeat. The ship's engines hum hymns no one remembers. If I survive to reach Terra, I will hand this record to the Conclave myself. If I do not, then let it be known. The Emperor's light has found a new vessel. One that bleeds, one that doubts, one that burns. And if he is still watching from his throne of gold, I pray he forgives me for letting his monster live. Because if he doesn't, there may soon be 2 gods in his galaxy. The Sanctus Veritas entered the Sol system wrapped in silence. No Vox traffic, no beacon signal. The Astronomican, once a blazing column of divine fire visible across light years, flickered now like a dying candle. Terra hung ahead, veiled in ash and orbital debris, its sacred glow muted beneath a haze of war. The ship drifted toward it like a penitent crawling to confession. Inquisitor Lyra Voss stood on the command dais, her reflection pale against the hololithic map. Around her, the crew moved in silence, their faces carved in devotion that no longer belonged to the Emperor. Every one of them wore the same symbol burned into their armor, a sun split between red and gold, the mark of the Red Saint. She didn't order them to remove it. She no longer had the strength. Holt had returned the night before. His hair was white now, his eyes dim as though he'd aged decades and days. He knelt before her quarters and spoke with a voice heavy with faith and exhaustion. "They're waiting for him," he said. "The ecclesiarchy, the conclave. They know something's coming. They feel it in the warp." She had looked at him then, her last loyal man, half mad from what he'd seen, and asked softly, "And what do you feel, Holt?" He had smiled through cracked lips. "Hope, Inquisitor. Emperor, forgive me, but hope." Now as the ship descended through Terra's poisoned atmosphere, the light of dawn filtered through storm clouds, painting the Sanctus Veritas in crimson and gold. The world below was not as she remembered from her brief audience years ago. The spires of the Imperial Palace were hidden behind layers of defense satellites and void shields, the skies thick with the ghosts of wars still smoldering. In the central sanctum, where the air shimmered with heat from the reactor core, the Hellboy waited. He stood unmoving, eyes closed, the veins of light under his skin pulsing in rhythm with the ship itself. The golden glow emanating from him filled the chamber like morning sunlight bleeding through stained glass. When Lyra entered, he opened his eyes. "We're here." "Yes," she said. "Terra," he nodded slowly. "The throne world of a dying god." "Watch your tongue," she warned, but the words were weak. He smiled faintly. "You don't correct me anymore." "Because I don't know what you are anymore," she admitted. He studied her face for a long moment. "Neither do I." The deck shuddered as docking clamps seized the ship. Vox bursts crackled through the command channels, the voice of the High Conclave itself cold and precise. "Inquisitor Voss, by decree of the Ordo Hereticus, you will surrender your vessel and its asset for immediate containment. Failure to comply will result in excommunication and exterminatus of all aboard. The message repeated. The Hellbourne looked toward the ceiling, as though listening to something beyond hearing. They'll kill me. They'll try. And you? I'll stand where I always have, between fire and faith. For a moment, something passed between them. Not trust, but understanding. The kind that comes only when both sides know there's no path left but the one that burns. The conclave arrived within the hour. Silver ships surrounded the Sanctus Veritas like blades around a throat. Boarding torpedoes slammed into the hull, disgorging custodians and gray knights in gleaming armor. The corridors filled with the sound of chanting and steel. The Emperor's will made manifest. Lyra walked at the front of the procession, her cloak dragging over the scorched floors. Behind her came the Hellbourne, unbound, his steps slow and heavy, each one echoing through the ship like a tolling bell. They entered the grand dock, where the air shimmered with psychic wards and the floor was lined with ecclesiarchal banners. At the far end stood the assembled judges of the Ordos, masked, faceless, divine. Inquisitor Lyra Voss, one of them intoned. You stand accused of heresy by preservation of an unclean abomination. The creature behind you is anathema. Deliver it for termination. Lyra's voice was calm. He has saved more lives than your prayers ever will. Faith cannot be born of corruption. Then what is the Imperium if not corruption given purpose? A murmur spread through the hall. The lead custodian stepped forward, spear blazing with holy light. Step aside, Inquisitor. She didn't move. If you kill him, you may kill what remains of his light. The custodian raised his weapon. The Emperor's light needs no imitation. The Hellbourne's voice rolled like thunder. Then you have not seen the darkness he left behind. The custodian lunged. The spear struck his chest and shattered. The impact sent a blast of golden flame through the chamber, hurling men from their feet. Alarm screamed. The banners caught fire. The Hellbourne stood amidst the chaos, his eyes ablaze with twin suns, his body crackling with energy that bent reality itself. Lyra shouted over the roar, "Stop this! They'll destroy you!" They already did. He roared, "Long ago!" Grey Knights surged forward, chanting exorcisms, their halberds raised. The flames recoiled at their presence, but the Hellbourne's power only deepened, his voice merging with something vaster, older, the echo of that golden being from the warp. Light consumed everything. When it faded, the hall was gone. So was the Sanctus Veritas, and in its place stood a plain of ash beneath a silent sky. Lyra lay upon the ground, her armor cracked, her lungs filling with smoke. The Hellbourne knelt beside her, the light around him dimming, fading into ember. "You're dying," she whispered. He nodded. "Maybe this is what faith costs." "You could have run?" He smiled faintly. "And leave you to write the ending wrong?" She tried to speak, but blood filled her throat. "What happens now?" He looked toward the sky, where the last glimmer of the Emperor's light shone through the smoke. "Now," he said softly. "Now he has a choice." "What choice?" "Whether to kill me," he said, "or remember me." The wind rose, scattering ash across the plain. The Hellbourne reached for her hand, his skin warm despite the fading fire within him. "Write the truth, Lyra," he whispered. "Not what they want to believe. Tell them I wasn't their savior. Then what were you?" He closed his eyes. A warning. The light within him finally dimmed. His body turned to dust, scattering into the wind like sparks returning to the forge. Lyra sat alone, the silence stretching around her like eternity. She opened her data slate with trembling hands and began to write. The last confession of the last Inquisitor who dared to love a monster. He was not born of man or demon. He was born of our desperation. And perhaps that is what makes him most human of all. If this record reaches the conclave, know this: the Emperor's light is not gone. It has simply found a new vessel, one made of blood, flame, and sorrow. Whether that vessel was salvation or damnation, I leave for you to decide. She pressed her seal to the parchment, her final act of duty, her final act of faith. Outside, the wind howled across the wasteland that had once been the heart of the Imperium. And for a brief, fleeting moment, as the ashes rose toward the stars, it seemed as though the Emperor's light burned just a little brighter. Not in heaven, not in man, but in the memory of a devil who tried to save both.